I'm Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you're listening to Hard NOC Life.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard NOC Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah. Pop culture.
Welcome to Hard NOC Life. I'm Keith Chow.
I'm Britney Monet.
What's going on, Britney?
Not much. So it was a good, Guardians-filled weekend for me.
It was a Guardians weekend. We're definitely going to be chatting about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. In fact, we're going to be joined later in the podcast by Nerds of Color writer, reporter, movie critic, Mike Manalo is joining us. He got a chance to talk to Chris Pratt and Chukwudi Iwuji, who are the main hero and main villain of Guardians 3. You can check those interviews out on our YouTube channel, but he'll be joining us to share his thoughts about James Gunn's Guardian Swan Song. But the main topic, of course, this week, it's the biggest movie in the galaxy. It grossed $114 million over the weekend. Let me put that spoiler tag out there because I think we're going to talk. It's hard to talk about the movie without spoiling it. So if you're one of the few who haven't seen it, pause the podcast, go watch it, and then come back because we're going to spoil the shit out of it.
Oh, yeah.
So let's start. I mean, you and I have said on this podcast for a minute that we have been disappointed in most of the Marvel movies that have come out in the last couple years.
Mm-hmm.
Phase 4 in particular. Phase 5 didn't kick off that great either with Ant-Man and the Wasp. So this is the first Marvel movie that I've had an emotional response to. Let me put it out there. Wakanda Forever, I emotionally responded to, but it wasn't because of the movie so much. I think it was just more the realization of Chadwick not being there. But the movie itself, I didn't think was as emotional, right? You know what I'm saying? Like I was crying in parts of it, but it was just because of the real life situation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes.
Like had Chadwick not passed away, I don't know if that movie would have resonated as much as it did. But that said, I cried at least in 4 parts during Guardians, which is completely story generated. You know what I'm saying? Like it had nothing to do with the fact that like, oh no, they're not going to make any more Guardians movies. It was just like emotionally resonant. How did you feel?
Yeah, and it's funny because I think I told you I was going to rewatch the first one today, which I did. And I didn't even like going back watching the first one today. I didn't realize how much heart James Gunn really does put into his work, because I did really like the first Guardians when it came out. And I remember telling people, oh, this might be better than Winter Soldier. And people were kind of like, I think you're crazy. And so watching it today, I was like, it is so like heartfelt, like from like Guardians from the beginning. It's full of heart. It's full of like, it really does hit that like found family. And sometimes your friends and stuff are like, the ones to heal you and love you. And like, you're your team, like, from day one more than sometimes what you were born into or whatever your situation,
Right.
So yeah, going into this one, I felt like I was punk gunched a lot because my favorite character was going through it.
So yeah, the biggest spoiler we'll put out there is that, all of those speculation going into this movie, you and I have talked about with the trailers and with all the anticipation, is that someone was going to die. Was it going to be Drax? Was it going to be Rocket? Was it going to be Star-Lord? Was it going to be everybody? Was it going to be everyone who's following James Gunn to the DC universe? And the big spoiler is nobody dies.
No.
I mean,
some people come close.
Rocket dies for like a minute, but he goes to like King's Cross Station, hangs out with Gandalf, and then comes back. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I blended Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. That was on purpose, you nerds out there who are like furiously typing in the comments. Gandalf is not Dumbledore. I knew that it was a joke. Anyway, he doesn't stay dead.
No.
That was the big surprise. And, I was happy because like you and I were predicting Rocket's demise for a couple months.
I didn't want it, but the trailers pointed to it, and I was like, and that's what's gonna get more of an emotional response. I said that would get more of a emotional response out of me out of any of the other characters, unfortunately. Which there's one character.
The trailer scene is Star-Lord crying, like screaming, and like that's where you and I were like, oh, that's definitely Rocket dying. And it was. But he didn't stay dead, so that was nice. Last week when Swara was guest hosting, we talked briefly about The Little Mermaid and how Disney's predilection for hyper realistic, photorealistic animals is kind of, everyone complains about the Lion King, the animals can't emote, and why would you remake the Lion King in photoreal, quote unquote, live action if you're just going to use real animal faces? And that's what we were talking about with the Little Mermaid, because now we've seen Sebastian and Flounder, and it's nightmare fuel, and it's these realistic looking animals who are trying to emote, and it doesn't work. And on the heels of that statement, Disney goes out and puts out Guardians of the Galaxy with photoreal animals that are emoting like crazy and making me cry. So I only the Sith deal in absolutes, and I will no longer say it's absolutely true that photoreal animal CGI is unemotional, because
I think it
holy
depends
shit.
on how much you put into it, though, because I know that Rocket is CGI, but it's done so well, and then they still capture the if you look sad or upset or happy, whatever, they still capture it really well. But with the Lion King, it wasn't there. It wasn't and I think it's because also he uses people in green suits, on set to kind of capture the way they're moving, to kind of put that together. And I think they did that too with it, but I don't know. Whatever.
At the end of the day, it was a raccoon and an otter hugging each other, and I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, but I think it's because maybe it's key. I don't know what James Gunn does with I don't know how much involved he is with the post CGI and doing all of that, but there's more emotions coming from whatever is going on in James Gunn's camp of figuring out CGI animals versus what we saw.
Speaking of James Gunn's camp, with the CGI at least, one of the other complaints of most of the late era Marvel movies is that, and the Disney Plus shows for that matter, is the lack of finished looking effects. That you can tell that the VFX artists are being run through the ringer because they're putting up so much content in so little time. And I wonder, James Gunn has always kind of been sequestered in his own part of the galaxy for, no pun intended. But, his movies have never been part of the machine of Marvel, right? They don't have to connect as hard as everybody else's stuff has to. He can kind of exist in his own corner of the universe. And I feel like that's kind of why the Guardians movies do feel so complete, if you think of all of the quote unquote character trilogies, you can't really watch Captain America, Winter Soldier, and Civil War in a row and they all make sense, right? Because particularly Winter Soldier to Civil War, right? They have all these Avengers movies in between that you kind of oh, okay, that's where we are. They don't tell a cohesive story. You know what I mean? Yes. Same thing with the Thor movies and the Iron Man movies. They don't really connect individually. They kind of connect, the larger saga, the overall franchise. But you could watch, to your point about rewatching the first one, you could watch 1, 2, 3 of Guardians. They're cohesive thematically, narratively. There may be some things that if you'd never watched the Avengers movies, you'd be confused about, but they do a good job explaining
especially in this
wars. One. Right.
Yeah, they explained it very shorthand. So you could really watch the 3 Guardians movies on their own and the Christmas special and you'll be fine. James Gunn did it. He's great. I feel that he's, not to say that there aren't other directors out there who don't love their source material, but he's one of the people who loves the source material and also knows how to get it right when adapting it, because there's some people who genuinely do work on these projects and love the source material but don't know how to actually adapt it for film and TV. But James Gunn, he knows, he got it. He's so good.
We already know what James Gunn brings to the table, even with the first 2 Guardians movies. Does this make you more excited for the new DCU? I don't know if you got a flash trailer in your screening.
I actually, all the trailers that you wanted to talk about last week that I'm not,
when you were I'm not joining because I don't want to watch the trailers.
because I try to avoid now, especially
of course.
They were releasing clips featuring Lila, and I was I'm not watching that. I'm trying, because I feel with the last, I can't remember when I stopped doing it, but before, I felt I had got so much of the movies that I was I don't want to watch.
Oh, for sure.
the trailers and stuff. Speaking of trailers, I saw the whole entire Gran Turismo movie in like whatever how long that trailer was. So I don't need to see that movie.
Yeah, modern trailers, like, they need to figure out how to like stop telling the whole story. And I think it's particularly for movies where they're like, maybe they're not sure they're going to have an audience, so they really kind of hit you over the head with every plot point, and they don't leave any of the mystery. And it's kind of like, then why would I want to go see the movie if I already know exactly everything that happens, or I can piece together what happens? Because like with the Guardians trailers, to your point, like as much as they showed, we were all speculating and making predictions and stuff, and it didn't play out at all the way I thought it would, Exactly. And I saw every Guardians trailer. I do skip the scenes when they release whole clips from movies. I think that's watching a scene out of context, I don't think is smart. You know what I mean? Because you lack the context. So why would you want to watch it?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the whole trailer, but I can tell that they have pulled back on, like, if they don't need to show Ezra, they're not going to show them. So yeah, they're definitely I think gonna steamroll marketing this now as like Supergirl and Batman's. Right. But anyway, but not to get off topic too much, but now that James Gunn is full, this is the moment after Guardians comes out, and now he can fully dedicate himself to DC. Although we're also in the midst of the writer's strike. I wonder how does that affect Superman Legacy, because he's James Gunn's in a weird position where he's like a writer and the studio head. Like, does he like not does he have to like go in a room and like pretend he's not working on this? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's a weird place to be if you're on strike, but you're also the studio head. So like, can he like secretly work on the Superman script in behind closed doors? But then he's a scab if he's doing that. So like, yeah,
it's such a weird place to be.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, because like, again, for in his position, since he is a studio head of DC Studios, like, I don't know where that falls into, like, if that falls
right?
into
It's
more
such a weird territory.
The other dude who runs like Warner Brothers, if like he's the one who's like, yeah, no, we're not paying people, so like, I don't know. So I hope he's not being a scab. I feel like, I mean, I don't know James Gunn personally, but I feel like he's not that type of person, regardless of what you may feel about his, tweets from the past or whatever.
Right.
Like,
yeah, and let me put it, no one on this podcast is accusing James Gunn of being a scab. It's just, if he has an idea about Superman that he didn't write down before May 1st, and he's like, oh yeah, I wanted to add this line of dialogue, does he just like not do it?
I mean, the only way I feel like it would, I maybe for me, I feel like the only way maybe it would really fully count as like scab is if he is actually submitting stuff up to the higher ups.
But he is the higher up. Like, once the thought goes to his head and he puts it down, even if he like does a voice memo, like, does the studio head version of James Gunn be like, oh, that's a great idea, oh shit, now I just crossed the picket line?
I don't know. Then I don't know how it works with him being like all three in one. I don't know. But I was gonna say, actually, rewatching Guardians and then seeing Volume 3 last night, like, I really feel that he can write a heartfelt and hopeful Superman.
Mm-hmm.
I know I probably said maybe before, I'm not sure, but I think he can do it. I do think it's going to be a little bit harder for him to have something that maybe is not fully like into the whole like grunge or like steampunk kind of like rock kind of like influences that he has on, like, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, the Guardians movies look like, psychedelic 70s album covers,
Yeah, especially though there's one part that made me think of actually the Beatles, but
but Superman has to feel like Americana, and particularly like what he said he's going for, because he's going away from this Zack Snyder kind of, like you said, grim and gritty version of Superman. He wants to bring back kind of like, not even the Christopher Reeve version, but like this wholesome all-American Superman vibe. And you're right, like it doesn't necessarily reconcile. Like, I can't picture a Superman movie with Radiohead needle drops. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
but you know, if anyone can pull it off, I think James Gunn can.
I think he can. And I was gonna say it watching this one, even though this one has a little more emotional gut punches, just because it is like the last film in a trilogy, and you have to kind of hit those more. It still really made me feel like, you know what? I think he can do Superman.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't cast Chris Pratt as Superman. That's all.
Oh, well, I don't think that's going to happen. He's even said like Chris Pratt's too old. Because again, if 38 is too old to be your young Superman, you know, R.I.P. Henry Cavill, then Chris Pratt can't be Superman either. Before we take a break and throw it to Mike joining us, I wanted to ask you about High Evolutionary, because one of the things Marvel's been, I guess they've gotten a little bit better over recent years, but like they've always had a hard time doing the villains. And High Evolutionary was, I think, one of the best villains the MCU's given us in a long time. What do you think about his character?
I agree, because he's just evil. And he's evil, and like I don't know how to explain it. Like he's I won't say he's like Thanos, but he's definitely just someone who you're like, oof, gosh, why do you have to be so like, it's like irritating evil where he gets under your skin.
I mean, when he shoots Lila, that's when you're like, fuck this guy. You know, and that's the kind of reaction you want to get from the supervillain. You know what I mean? You don't want to just kind of be like, one of the issues I think with Quantumania is like, I didn't really give a shit about Kang, to be completely honest. Like he didn't come off to me in the movie as someone that like was scary, or, you know, like I think it didn't help that like Scott Lang's the one who gave him the beat down. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh.
Yeah, I think that, and I think because the original ending was gonna be like either one of the characters not making it or just being stuck in the quantum realm with Kang, and they changed that last second because they wanted to end on a more like hopeful note, I guess. Like, I'm sorry, I think they need to go for the thing that's gonna be like, oh wow, they did that, like, you know. And I think they should have went for that, because especially because it's Kang, like he should be a little bit more formidable. Is that the right word? Yeah,
totally right. And he was not formidable. Like there was no kind of dread when Kang confronts Ant-Man, where like, and there wasn't even like the confrontation between Quill and High Evolution. There wasn't dread, but like all those flashbacks where you like got to see his, you know, quote unquote evolution from just like a regular scientist dude to like the guy with no face. Because, you know, like the moment he shoots Lila and kills her friends, it was like, okay, this is clearly the worst person in the world. So
yeah, I mean, to already do like, he's already like,
I don't care about the torturing the animals. What you shot Lila right when they're about to go into the sky forever, you know. But
well, I was gonna say that it was already pretty bad when you kind of knew, like, I just when you see Rocket's a baby, like so little, when that happens to him, and you're just like, oh no.
His first word is hurts.
I know, and that was like, no. Yeah, that Rocket's my favorite. So like, I was just like, I was on an emotional roller coaster because it's like, they can't not Rocket. Even though I saw it coming, I was like, no.
We're going to talk with Mike Manalo, who had the opportunity to talk to the hero and villain of Guardians of the Galaxy. And he'll talk to us about his thoughts on the movie, as well as talking to those stars. So, Brittany, you're a big fan of Paramount Plus, aren't you?
Oh, I am indeed. That is the home of one of my favorite shows, which I know some people, I've talked about it.
Yeah. You're not the demographic.
I know I'm not the demographic, but the show I'm talking about is obviously Yellowstone. If you don't know, I love Yellowstone, and it's literally one of the most like, I'm saying, I know a lot of people like, oh, it seems like it's for like rednecks or something like that. I promise you, the drama is so good. It's just, and if you're a fan of Twilight, there's like an actor from Twilight that's on there.
Well, it's one of the biggest shows in the world.
Yes.
And it's got these like great spinoffs, right? Because isn't 1923 a spinoff of Yellowstone and 1883? Am I getting those years correct?
No, it's 1923. I'm not there yet on the spinoffs.
But it's
I
got like
have one.
Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren. Like,
Yes.
that's crazy that those are like actors you get for TV shows.
Tim McGraw and Faith Hill are on the 18 one, if you are a country fan. Which Tim McGraw is honestly a really great actor. Don't know if you've ever seen Friday Night Lights, but he's a great actor. So they're great. Those are great things to check out. I have to wait for my mom and brother to watch it because we are such a fan of the show. Teen Wolf is also on Paramount Plus, and they released a new movie with Tyler Hoechlin is in it and back. So I'm excited to watch that finally when I get around to it. I know it's been like 2 months now, but it's hard to coordinate our schedules.
Well, the reason we're bringing up Paramount Plus is that if you click on the link in the description to this podcast, you can actually stream Paramount Plus for 1 month for free. We're just excited that we get to share Paramount Plus with all of our listeners. So click on the link that you see in the description and stream Paramount Plus for free for a month. Try it. If you don't like it, you can cancel. But if you love it, if you love Yellowstone, Teen Wolf, Star Trek, all of the Star Treks are on Paramount Plus. Do that and you'll help us out in the process. All right, so we are joined by fellow nerd of color, the movie critic extraordinaire for the blog, as well as the person who interviewed both the villain and hero of Guardians of the Galaxy. Please welcome back to the podcast, Mike Manalo.
Hey guys, thank you so much. Correct on all accounts except for the extraordinaire part. That part is completely fabricated. But
absolutely, you're right. The mediocre writer of the Nerds of Color. Please welcome Mike Manalo.
Thank you guys. How's everyone doing? Hope everyone's doing great. And yeah, I'm excited to get into it. I'm excited to talk about Guardians.
Yeah, for sure. So we're already heavy into spoiler territory. Brittany and I were just recounting all the moments we cried our eyes out during Guardians Volume 3. Before we get to your interviews with Chris Pratt and Chukwudi Iwuji, I wanted to ask, you did write the official review for the blog. We could just go read that. It will be in the description below. But what were your thoughts from your multiple screenings of Guardians 3?
Yeah, so my third time seeing it was Friday. So me going back to see it multiple times is probably a good indication about how much I liked it, along with the review that I posted, which is, I gave it an A. I'm not going to lie. And quite frankly, I know that the disappointment for Marvel Studios has actually been pretty common post Endgame, which I to a degree it makes a lot of sense. I think there's been a lot of unevenness in their projects. But there are 3 that stand apart as far as the movies are concerned as things that I would really say are among the very best that Marvel Studios has to offer. No Way Home was one, Wakanda Forever was another for me, and now Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I definitely think it's between those 3 are my favorite post-Endgame, and I'm actually thinking after my third screening that I'm going to give maybe a hair to potentially Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, it might change tomorrow, but I like this movie that much. It is really one of my favorites. It's definitely my favorite Guardians movie, and that's a hard bar to clear because that first movie is really, it was kind of a game changer, both from a space opera standpoint and a comic book movie standpoint. But there was something about the third movie that it keeps getting me every single time I see it. I get very emotional every single time I see it, and no one does happy, sad, I think, in film today better than James Gunn, in my opinion. When you're smiling, but you're also tearing up as you are by the final note of Dog Days of Summer at the end of this movie, it's really, it feels like a triumph for both this franchise, but also as far as cappers for superhero movie trilogies. This might be my favorite superhero movie trilogy of all time,
Yeah, we already discussed, I think, Brittany, you please, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think we both put Guardians 3 at the top of the post-Endgame era, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's up there. I think Guardians Volume 3 and Werewolf by Night are the best post-Endgame things that Marvel has done.
Yeah.
To me, they're both heartfelt. They both take risk. They both fit into the genre outside of comic book that they're supposed to be so well, and they're unique. They look different. They feel different, but everything is done well too. Like the acting. I saw Guardians in 3D, so for me, a lot of this stuff looked really cool, and especially the fight scene in the spaceship towards the end of the movie.
The hallway fight.
Yeah, it looks so good. It was just really cool. Adam WarRock was super cool. It was just, he was fun. He's funny.
We didn't touch on Adam WarRock in the first half of the podcast. So I'm glad, Mike, you're on too, because I did want to dig into this. I guess if there was one criticism, and I don't have this criticism for what it's worth, because I'm not the biggest Adam WarRock fan. I prefer Adam WarRock over Adam WarRock, who shout out to Eugene, who does the theme song for the podcast. But if you are a hardcore Adam WarRock fan, and I know they're out there because, you know, it's the internet.
Yeah.
You know, if there's one criticism you may have about this film is that like the Adam WarRock that you may remember from the comics is not so much the Adam WarRock that Will Poulter plays. What was your impression of the way they interpret WarRock in Guardians 3?
Yeah, so I think it fits in with what Gunn's trying to do. I think the story that he was trying to tell with Adam WarRock being in this cocoon and having his gestation period, I suppose, interrupted prematurely, it fits with the characterization of him. Now, granted, of course, it's not the comics accurate Adam WarRock, and I understand that. I definitely do think that they shortchanged the development of the character a little bit, but at the end of the day as well, this is not an Adam WarRock movie. This is a Guardians movie and a concluding chapter. You send off Adam WarRock at the end of this movie in such a way where you can definitely have a lot more adventures that will end up defining this character into the character that people know and love. Look at what they did with Peter Parker after No Way Home. It's much more status quo with the comic book than we saw Peter Parker in Civil War or Homecoming. So to develop a character, or to at least set him up, make him compelling, make him interesting and funny, endearing, I should say, you know, but leave room for him to develop into the character that we know and love, that opportunity is still there. So I thought that in a Guardians movie that needs to be focused on the Guardians and bring a conclusion to the stories of these characters, you utilize Adam WarRock as best as you could, with room to grow later on in the MCU.
Anyone who may have a complaint about Adam WarRock in the movie, and I think, you know, it's also the timing that if you wanted to bring the traditional Adam WarRock into the MCU, you needed to do it before Infinity War, because like the defining characteristic of Adam WarRock is his, you know, love-hate relationship with Thanos and his possession of the Infinity Gauntlets, like all that stuff. And I feel like maybe, you know, Gunn's firing might have also screwed that up too, because like Guardians 3 was supposed to come out years ago, you know, had he not had that little detour into the DC universe, which ultimately it sucked him in completely now that he's completely running the DC universe. But the Adam WarRock Thanos relationship is impossible to have now, since Thanos is no longer even a thing in Marvel. But yeah, I didn't have a problem with Will Poulter. I thought he was great. I just thought that like there's definitely going to be, if anyone who's going to criticize Guardians, it's going to be hashtag not my Adam WarRock. And also, you know, and I think that's probably the only thing you could complain about. I mean, you could maybe complain about like the characters progressively get like louder in all of James Gunn's movies. Like, if you go back and watch Guardians 1, they're not screaming at each other every 5 seconds, but like by the time you get to Peacemaker and literally like every line of dialogue is shouted at each other. That was the only thing I was like, all right, Mantis, like, chill out.
It's love shouting.
Although Mantis shouting is a refreshing, like, change of pace for her character, right?
Yeah,
like, we never hear her get upset, and that's really crucial to the development of her character. So I love that she fires back. But
I also love that Karen Gillan gets basically like co-lead of this film. This is much more a Nebula film and a Rocket film than any of the other Guardians movies, and that was really cool too. And especially like, you know, I mentioned I cried maybe 5 times in the movie. One of the most emotionally resonant scenes for me is when Nebula found out Rocket survived.
Yeah.
Me too.
And then, like, you know, Brittany and I were talking about how the Guardians movies work on their own. They don't have, like, they're one of the few Marvel franchises that actually work as a trilogy. Like, you don't have to watch the other movies. But, you know, having watched Avengers Endgame, knowing that Nebula and Rocket had a bigger bond than any of the other Guardians because they were the only ones that survived for 5 years.
Yep.
That was, ooh, boy, I'm tearing up thinking about it.
Like, even just her defending their quest to save Rocket from Gamora, her own sister, you know, was such a standout moment. And you're right, Keith. I mean, like that scene got me too, where she hears Rocket's voice and she just breaks down almost because she's just so relieved. And it's that relationship and Karen's development as a character throughout this franchise has just been stellar. I mean, you know, I thought she acted it beautifully. I think this is the best, actually, performances that we've gotten out of these actors for the entirety of the MCU up to now. And God, Karen just sells it. That scene just sells it. It's beautifully done. Honestly, it's wonderful.
Well, speaking of the actors, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your interviews with both Chris Pratt and Chuck Iwuji, who you've spoken to before. You spoke to Chuck during Peacemaker, and he remembered you during the Guardians press junket. So what were those opportunities for you? Like, I mean, and you talked to Chris for Super Mario Brothers, so like you're like first name basis with all these cats. But what was it like to talk to them specifically about Guardians?
Honestly, here's the thing. I suppose maybe I shouldn't even be reviewing Marvel movies because I love Marvel so much. It's just been a part of my life for a long time. I try and go to these movies objectively and everything like that. And I try and not make the interviews affect my opinions of the movies, which it didn't in this case, of course. But admittedly, I say all this because I've never really gotten to interview the lead for any Marvel movie so far. I've interviewed some folks from Marvel films, and I've been completely honored and completely floored and completely happy to do all that, but never the leads. So to get Chris, and especially so soon after Mario, which unfortunately it was virtual and I had really bad connection issues. This felt like redemption for me to do it in person and to be able to do it in costume too. It was amazing. He was incredibly nice. I will say this, I'm going to be, and granted, this is not a criticism on Chris. I think I came with questions that he wasn't really prepared to answer. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but just saying that because it felt like he had to take a lot of moments to try and think about the specific answers that he wanted to say for these things. And part of it is probably because he's had like a long junket. I think we were the last leg of this junket, but the other half was maybe he hadn't had time to think about these sort of answers on the fly. So he answered it the best that he could. He gave some really terrific answers. I think one of the things about this movie that I thought they did beautifully was the relationship between Gamora and Star-Lord. And how it ends is perfectly done. And then also this coming back into Peter's life from an emotional standpoint, it can't be easy for him. So that's one of the things that I asked him, and he gave like just the most beautiful answer about, from a narrative standpoint, it's really good to have her back because it's going to kind of push him into completion of a character arc where he kind of decides that he needs to figure out who he is. But then also from an emotional standpoint, it's really not good for her to be back because, he needs to move on from her. He needs to move on from this tragedy. And we're seeing in the movie that he's not. So he gave a really fantastic response. And, in my opinion, why wouldn't he? He knows this character inside and out at this point. So I really liked doing that. He was super nice, I think the one thing he wasn't ready for was I asked him a question about what song really defined his journey from this trilogy, because what's Guardians if not also partially the music? And I think he was searching through the entire catalog and trying to figure out which one really defined him. But in my head, and I didn't want to answer for him, but just my opinion, there's really only one song that defines Star-Lord, maybe even defines Chris, and that's Come and Get Your Love, because
movie, I was like, having seen your interview and having edited the interview, right? Like, I was actually surprised you didn't know the answer after seeing it, because that was the button on the whole movie too, because
exactly
during the post-credit scene, when we have the new Guardian scene, like that's the other spoiler alert. I mean, we're already deep into spoilers, but like you see what the new version of the Guardian, and who knows if this is the version that's going to pop up again, but like the version that's in the post-credit scene is led by Rocket, features Adam WarRock and a few others, but the button is they do their mission to Come and Get Your Love by Redbone. So
it's exactly it's the bookends for this franchise, right? Like it starts the first movie with Come and Get Your Love, it ends this movie with Come and Get Your Love, or technically Badlands by Bruce Springsteen, but
right. With the relevant with the diegetic, right? Because the Come and Get Your Love is diegetically in the scene because Rocket plays it. Before we wrap, like I mentioned, you and Chuck, you guys get along so well because you had interviewed him right before Peacemaker came out, and he's a Royal Shakespearean actor, and but I think for like nerds and comic book fans, like he's a new face. No pun intended. Not having seen the movie, but just talk quick about what it was like talking to him right before Peacemaker, before anyone knew who he was, and then now, like as he's about to lead into Guardians,
and now talking to him while he's an MCU star too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, honestly, it was wonderful. When I saw him in Peacemaker, he was so good. He really impressed me. He was funny as hell, but he was also heavy as hell too. Like whenever he would go into a dramatic scene, you felt for this guy, this boss named Myrn, and he's not in the comics. You have no pre-existing reason to like him, but you end up doing so because the writing is strong, because Chuck's performance is fantastic. And you see him, he becomes really a true hero in that show. And now coming into the MCU, knowing that he's a high evolutionary and seeing him do a complete heel turn, a complete 180 to the most despicable, irredeemable character in the MCU that we've seen in a long time. It was brilliant. It's a brilliant performance. And now he's able to talk about it. Now he's able to talk about everything and spoil a little bit about where his character's at. He recognized that this character wasn't redeemable at all. He recognized and he played it that way. And he gives us a Joker-esque character who can't be reasoned with, who has no real legitimate sympathy to him at all. And I thought it was perfectly well done, because the MCU is nothing if not all about the sympathetic villain with Loki, with Thanos, with even to a degree King. But there's nothing redeemable about High Evolutionary. I love that Chuck touched on that's how he played it. And I hope people get that impression as well, because he's a monster, and he's a monster that we want to see go down. So I'm glad that he talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all said this is probably the best post-Endgame Marvel movie. Everyone gave amazing acting performances. I don't know, I'm excited to see what they do with the new Guardians team. I really don't care to see more Chris Pratt. Sorry. Oh, I was like, leave him there.
Well, which was surprising that the last thing is Star-Lord is coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, great. I was the person, and I said it loud enough in my theater when he basically was out in the space. I was just, leave him there. Sorry. I don't know. In terms within the movies, I'm fine with Chris Pratt, but I don't want to see more Chris Pratt. I'm sorry. If you feel the other way, I'm not gonna
let them fight.
But...
You're entitled to have that opinion, Brittany. I mean, it's totally okay. Having chatted with him, I enjoyed getting the chance to talk with him. He's a super nice guy, but I also understand the criticisms that people might have, and no one should be forced to feel or think or have the same opinions as me or anyone else. So I do think that they'll probably bring him back for the 2 Avengers movies, and he'll probably be the only Guardian back. But I'd love to see, to Keith and your point, more of Rocket's team, because that would be cool.
Yeah. Just Rocket is my favorite from these Guardians movies. So I went through the emotional ringer in this movie.
It is quite the emotional roller coaster for sure. And I didn't go into the Guardians movies as, I think most people, I didn't know who the fuck the Guardians of the Galaxy were. And I think why that first Guardians movie is so important to the MCU, it was proof that you could make a compelling movie about the most random, deep cut characters. And, 9 years later, being one of the best in the entire franchise. Right. Because think about pre-24, we always talk about how Iron Man, Thor were not A-list superhero characters, right? Like the MCU made them into A-list superhero characters. But then they were like, you know what? We're not just going to make our B-list characters A-list. We're going to make our Z-list characters A-list too, right? Like the fact that, Rocket embracing his Rocket Raccoon name in this movie, getting a cheer from the audience. Again, tell a 2012 comic book reader that in a decade, people are going to cheer loud as hell. As loud as they cheered for Mjolnir, as loud as they cheered for all 3 Peters, they're going to cheer for Rocket Raccoon. They'll be like, what the fuck are you talking about? So that's a testament to not just James Gunn, but this franchise overall. So shout out to Guardians 3. It is one of the best Marvel movies ever.
Oh,
made.
did we talk about? It actually did hit me emotionally when Peter came home to his grandpa.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that hit me. But yeah, I really like this movie. It's great. And I think that this proves as long as you have a great story, the spectacle will be fine.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, Mike, anything nerd popping for you this week?
Yeah, I think so. Look out on the Nerds of Color, of course, for a couple of interviews for the movie Hypnotic, the latest from Robert Rodriguez. We'll potentially be talking to Alicia Braga, who was also, there's a Gunn connection there because she was in the Suicide Squad, later this week, and we'll have that on the channel soon. Overall, though, I might also be potentially seeing in advance a movie that I'm not necessarily looking forward to seeing, but let's just say it's going to be all about family. We'll leave it at that, and look out for potential reviews about the family, later this week.
Nice.
Yeah.
Like the family.
Family. Yeah. Family. You have to say it like that, like you're a big muscle-headed person,
I just can't believe the X-Men are going to be in this one. So that's the thing that's shocking.
Yeah, honestly, I thought it was a laxative commercial at first, Fast X. So I'm just saying it's not a good title, but whatever. It's fine.
I'm looking forward to it because I love those movies. And look, I want to see Groot and Aquaman throw down.
Yeah, that would be great. That's a movie right there.
Brittany, what's nerd popping?
So yeah, I just finally watched Scream 6 and Smile over like the last week. I loved them both. I'm always gonna be like Scream is like that's my. Ironically, Scream is my favorite scary movie. Or unironically, I don't know. I really enjoyed it, but I really like Smile. It really is just a movie about like what happens when we hold on to our traumas and don't know how to move on and like let it go, and how it kind of in a way can come back to eat you. Like it's so good. I really liked it a lot, so highly recommend checking those out if you are a scary movie person like me.
Smile is creepy as hell. Yeah,
it's very creepy. That one jump scare got me. I screamed so loud. And I watched it in the daylight, and it still scared me. So,
for me, we are entering the final 4 episodes. Well, the final 3 episodes now of The Flash on the CW, and like I said, I loved that show when it first came out. I think I've been out on it for the last couple years, just because it's been on for a while. It's its 9th and final season, and don't hate me, but I just stopped paying attention to the show. But I decided, well, I'm going to watch the last half of the last season at least, and the first episode of this 4-part finale was one of the best Flash episodes I've ever seen. It really taps into like the first 2 seasons of the Flash. Without spoiling, it's basically Barry gets trapped in year 2000 on the day that his mother dies, but the way it kind of like brings back that element of the first season, and it was really good. And I didn't expect to like a Flash episode as much as I did, because I haven't liked the Flash in some time now. But if you get a chance, speaking of things going away after 9 years, say goodbye to the Flash by watching these last 3 episodes. Be prepared to be emotionally moved by the first part of this 4-part finale. So anyway, that's it for me. Mike, since you are our guest today, can you tell the people how to find you on the internet?
Absolutely. Thank you guys again for having me. Everyone listening, you can find me at TidyBullBoy182 at Twitter and Instagram. But you know what? My home and everything I share, it's always going to be the Nerds of Color. So at the Nerds of Color.
Thanks, Mike. Brittany, how can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, and Hive, pretty much at Hi Brittany Monet. And then you can check out my other podcast, Situation Room, at @FlitRoom_podcast, which we actually just recorded an episode today, which it's been a few months since we did. So yeah, that should be out soon. So look out for that.
You can find me on Twitter at @TheRealChow, _real_Chow, and on Instagram at RealKeithChow. Follow the Nerds of Color at the Nerds of Color, and go to hardknockmedia.com to find this podcast alongside all of the other podcasts in the Hard Knock family. Give us a rating and a review if you do. Subscribe to our videos so you can see Mike's interviews at youtube.com/the Nerds of Color, and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Nerds of Color. That's Hard Knock Life for this week. Until next time. I can. Okay, I don't start singing.